Hello, AP World History students. This is part 2 of chapter 36. We've already talked about Japanese aggression into China, Italy in Ethiopia, and now we're going to take a look at German aggression. So a lot of people, when they think about World War II, the first thing that comes to mind is Hitler and the Nazis. And we see pictures like this, and we wonder how it is that such a militaristic force who seemed to be lockstep in command with everything that Hitler said could come to be. You've already read an article about the rise of Hitler, and you know some of the things that led to his popularity and that led to the nationalism that drove Germany eventually into declaring war in numerous areas. But it took a little bit of time before actual war began. First of all, Hitler withdraws from the League of Nations. He has no interest in being involved in the League of Nations, and it's very likely that he had plans for taking over much of Europe when he did so. What he believed was that he needed something called Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. Now, remember, he believed in the concepts of scientific racism and social Darwinism, and he was also intensely anti-Semitic. He also believed in the superiority of the German or the Aryan people. He really remilitarized Germany, even though that was forbidden under the Treaty of Versailles. What they did was they actually practiced formations with things like shovels or pitchforks, and they practiced their formations. And underground, of course, they were very busy building up a weapons arsenal that would be very difficult to overcome because so many of the other countries surrounding Germany had demilitarized. So basically, Hitler, reoccupies the Rhineland. This was an area that bordered France and Germany. Now, many people in the Rhineland region were actually of German descent, but they were not considered to be part of Germany after the borders were drawn after World War I. But Hitler claimed, that's a problem, and so we want the Rhineland back. And in fact, the Rhinelanders want to be part of Germany because they are, after all, of German descent. So this happens, and as happened when Japan attacked China, nothing really happened. And then in 1938, if you've ever seen The Sound of Music, it's somewhat of an iconic picture that some of you have maybe seen. They show in there a scene that would be called the Anschluss, or union, with Austria in 1938. Now, Austria speaks German. Many people in Austria would call themselves German, and in fact, Hitler himself was born in Austria. And in 1938, the German army merely walked through the streets of Salzburg, of Vienna, and basically pulled Austria into a union with Germany. They also then annexed the Czech Sudetenland, and to annex an area basically just means that there's probably a vacuum of power, and that it really wasn't a problem for the Germans to go into the Sudetenland region and proclaim their dominance of that area. Now, on the next slide, I'll show you a map of what this looks like. This is the Rhineland area. That was the first to go. This is the area of the Anschluss, or Austria, and Czechoslovakia is a very oddly shaped country here, and in fact, it is no longer Czechoslovakia. This little area here and this region here were taken into German control when the Germans took over Sudetenland. So this is the area that's called Sudetenland. Okay, so that's the first stage, pretty nonviolent and pretty easy to just take over control of those areas. In the Munich Conference of 1938, this is Chamberlain, and Italy, France, Great Britain, and Germany meet in Munich. The Allies follow a policy of appeasement. And here he is holding up the paper that says we have peace for all time. So they basically allow Hitler to take the Sudetenland and Austria and the Rhineland in return for Hitler's promise to stop expansion, which Hitler did. He said, okay, I'll stop expanding. He never had any intent to stop expansion, but at least for the time being, it appeared that maybe this would end. So, like I said, this is British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, and like I also said, he brags that he has achieved peace for our time. Well, it didn't last very long. Hitler secretly signs a Russian-German Treaty of Non-Aggression in 1939. That means that Russia would not attack Germany, nor would Germany attack Russia. Well, we will soon see that that treaty did not last very long. Now we have Germany actually beginning conquest. In 1939, on September 1st, Germany did what was called a blitzkrieg, or a lightning war strategy, against Poland. So the Air Force softened the target by strafing and bombing, and then armored divisions rush in and they take over control of much of Poland. There is some disagreement about whether there were Germans in Poland that were happy that the Germans came in or not. And my understanding is that the invasion of Poland came quite as a surprise and actually did cause a number of casualties. Now, German U-boats threaten British shipping in the Atlantic, just like in World War I. The U-boats were taken out and they were continuing to torpedo targets in the Atlantic Ocean. This is a picture of German troops that just came across the screen kind of slowly. Anyways. So what happens next? The fall of France. In 1940, Germany increases its occupation to Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. So actually, in Denmark, in my great-grandfather's home, there is a baby grand piano, and the Nazis who came into Denmark, where my grandfather lived in southern Denmark, came in and took control of their house. They basically told them they have to move out. And so etched in the piano is actually a serial number that was left there by the Nazis. When the Nazis did leave Denmark, my grandparents' family was able to move back into their home. Hitler forces the French to sign an armistice agreement. So basically the idea here is Hitler's already shown that he's pretty strong, and if the French did not sign an armistice, they would attack. I think the expressions on the face of the Parisians here makes it pretty clear that this was something that they did not want to do. Hitler took this infamous ride into Paris, and as you can see, the Eiffel Tower is behind him here, and certainly I believe for the French people, this was very devastating. And of course, there would be an active French resistance movement during World War II. There are lots of books written about it. There was one recently I've seen some people read called The Light We Cannot See, and that takes place in France, and that is quite a good book, actually. Now, the Battle of Britain was not peaceful at all. So the Brits at this time are alone against the Germans. They have no allies. The Brits were supposed to help out Poland. They weren't really able to do much with Poland. Poland was their ally. The French are under the control of the Germans, and so who is going to help the British at this point? The U.S. is not involved. So what the German Luftwaffe did is from July to October 1940, they conducted a number of air raids over London and other parts of England. Now, it was pretty clever of them because they would do the air raids when the tides were low. And so when the tides are low, the Thames River is low as well. And this is where firefighters would come in and they would bring their hoses and they would try to pump water from the river. But if the tide is low and the river is low, they're not able to get as much water out of their hoses in order to fight the fires that were left by the bombs. So this is called the Battle of Britain, or the Blitz. The German Air Force killed about 40,000 British civilians in urban bombing raids, especially in London. The Royal Air Force does use a new technology of radar to prevent German invasion. And also, you maybe have seen references in movies such as the Lion, the Witch, of the Wardrobe. I think there are a few other movies where we see that children were sent out into the countryside, but many of the adults stayed within London during this time to show their strength and solidarity against the Germans. The king was also very visible at this time, even though he didn't really have a lot of ruling power in Britain at this time. That was mostly left to the prime minister. He was really, he and the queen were really important as far as putting a public face to the people of Britain and inspiring them through this time. Finally, the Germans gave up in October of 1940. 1941, Hitler moves his battle to North Africa, and World War II is an entire semester in itself, a semester college course or a PhD, to be honest. The battles in North Africa were primarily tank battles, panzer divisions. They were in Egypt. They were really strategic, pretty intense battles. I have a friend who's a retired military, and he is just fascinated by the battles in North Africa. We're not going to talk about them so much in this class. The next one is Operation Barbarossa in 1941. And some of the links that I have on the PowerPoint here are not able to be played while I'm doing the screencast. But Operation Barbarossa was the invasion of the USSR by the Nazis. The Germans were helped by Hungary, Finland, and Romania. Now, they surprised Stalin, and they were initially successful in their invasions. However, the Russians were able to hold them off for a while, and as the winter descended upon the German troops, they were unprepared for the cold weather. Remember, the same thing happened to Napoleon. And so the Germans became weaker and weaker in the winter. They did not have good gear. What Stalin does is he moves the industry farther east, away from where the Germans are, and the U.S. gives aid to the USSR. And the kind of aid they give might be in things like clothing, boots, socks, other things that will help the USSR. So at this time, the US and the USSR are allies, even though when Operation Barbarossa started, the US was not officially in the war. The Soviets begin their counterattack in 1942, and the two key points of attack and counterattack were the siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad. And the stories that come out of these two battles are fascinating. There's actually a person at the high school whose grandparents were in Stalingrad, and they talk about how some people escaped in the back of trucks, but how most people really defended their homes, and even though they were under siege, they remained strong. Eventually, the Germans would lose Operation Barbarossa. It was a major epic failure for the Germans, but it caused also a major epic loss of life. So at this point, I'm going to end this video, and we will continue in part 3 of chapter 36.